energy storage is essentially it is flexibility kind of embodied. It has its key purpose is flexibility, whether that's to offset the consumption of solar generation, whether that's to buy energy from an electricity market and sell it later. Its core purpose is flexibility, and it can respond fast, and it can both consume and discharge electricity to the network. So it's kind of it's a really essential technology. Most of the energy storage that we see around the world and in most markets most countries is pumped hydro. But as Brenda's mentioned, there is electrochemical energy storage is really interesting. It's really important, and there's a lot of interest in it as a technology. This is our view of energy storage across Europe, and just to demonstrate that there's interest, you can see our forecasts are based on a number of different sources and models, and you can see that there's quite significant growth. There's been a lot of growth already to 2021, and our forecasts expect that it's going to continue. And all of this energy storage is being used for flexibility. This graph actually shows 3 different segments of the energy storage market. So it shows the residential market in dark blue, the commercial industrial market in kind of medium blue, and front of meter market in light blue. The residential market is the sort of thing, and the C&I market, the sorts of systems that Brenda was showing you. That's what they kind of look like as an energy storage technology. But you can see that a lot of the growth is actually coming from the front of meter market, and that's because there is so much of a need for flexibility for the system operators, but also because as these systems become more prolific, and investors become more used to them, and learn what they can do. There's also a lot of interest in using these to generate quite significant revenue from energy markets. So to discuss how batteries can be monetized, there are lots of different value streams which they can access. The 2, I think, which are probably most pertinent to the demand side flexibility story are self-consumption optimization and network charge avoidance. So self-consumption optimization will be a topic that's dear to many of your hearts. How can you make sure you're using as much of your solar output as possible? Actually, for the commercial industrial market segment, so for these larger storage systems that businesses are using, network charge avoidance becomes really important. So how can I minimize the charges I'm paying to the distribution system operator or the transmission system operator for connecting to their network? Often in many countries across Europe, this is the biggest charge, and this is the biggest component of an energy bill that a customer might face, a C&I customer might face. In the UK, actually, this is changing. So we're seeing the removal of triads, which is having a big impact on the business case for energy storage. It's kind of cutting off one of the 3 legs of the business case, as we say. But it's still where network charges give you some optionality where you can change your consumption, and in doing so, reduce the bills that you have to pay. This is really important. So these 2. Okay. Did you say close to time?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll just finish up. So some other, to bring this back to business models, some other value streams which are important to energy storage are power quality and backup power. So these typically don't deliver a lot of value to many consumers, but where a consumer is, for example, a manufacturing plant and is really interested in having a stable voltage, or where, for example, they're a data center and their business is entirely based on having a constant source of power, this essentially will make or break the business case. This will make customers very willing to pay for energy storage. And then finally, there are the energy markets, which are the core sources of energy system flexibility. So this is where the transmission system operator can buy rapid response flexibility from batteries. in order to balance a grid, or wholesale markets, which is an increasing source of value for batteries. I'm going to leave it there. I think we're out of time, but I'm really happy to answer any questions you have. It's been a bit of a whirlwind tour through flexibility. Yeah, happy to discuss anything. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Robin. I'm not going to ask you a question at this point in time. I was equally engrossed in your talk there, so I didn't actually give you a 2-minute warning and let you drag on a bit. So I'm going to go right on to our third and final speaker, and again, save the questions for the end. Just a reminder to anybody wishing to ask questions, make sure you put them in the chat, and make sure you put the name of who you're directing your question to, which will help us at the end. I think the key takeaways from that talk there, Robin, specifically when it comes to battery storage, is we need the ability for flexibility across the sector, large scale, right down to distributed scale, and it needs to be both fast and last for a long time, which really ties back to Brenda, her talk with Storterra, the lithium ion products for fast response, and the flow batteries for something more small scale and reserved. So I'll hand over now to apologies, Dr. Jacopo Toriti, who is Professor of Energy Economics and Policy at the School of Built Environment at the University of Reading. He's an economist with experience in the costs, benefits, risks, and risk of energy and environmental storage. Jacopo, your talk is entitled Smart Solar at Scale, Challenges and Solutions to Policy and Regulatory Barriers. I'll hand over to you now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks for inviting me to speak this evening. So I thought I would start by presenting the center in which I work and I co-direct. Is a Center for Research into Energy Demand Solutions. This is a large center involving several universities, and all of our research focuses on various aspects of energy demand. I lead the flexibility theme, which you see, at the bottom here in orange, and the other thing I was going to say is the center is centrally managed by the University of Oxford, and we're considered a cross-cutting theme because flexibility might indeed be coming from buildings, but also from transport, like electric vehicles, and indeed involves different materials and products, as we know from the sort of storage research and discussions and applications. There are material issues which are of interest to anyone doing sustainability and these kind of issues. My theme, so the center is really large. I mean, it's a kind of 150 academics or so. The theme I lead on flexibility is really a mix of more traditional electrical engineering modelers and agent-based modelers, but also has a strong social science component. So kind of sociology of practice. So, what is the timing of energy demand? Why do we have peaks? And as a way to understand how we can mitigate them, right? And what levels of flexibility we might be introducing in everyday life. So those are the nice pictures of my colleagues. Before I get to the content really of this presentation, the type of projects that we are working on, and you can see we're really trying to cover as much as possible as some kind of fairly critical questions around flexibility. So we look at, for instance, we had a special issue which came out earlier this year on flexibility in the past. We found some fascinating facts around, balancing demand and supply in in history. We think of the future not just in terms of transition, technological transition to net zero carbon, but also what everyday life might look like. Are we going to work from home a lot? We have projects with sort of smart meter data around COVID-19 lockdowns, and trying to understand what the future might look like. We have work on measuring flexibility of demand, where we try to come up with metrics other than the ones that are typically used in the energy system. There are very interesting issues around space and how it's measured, and that is of interest to storage. So it's not just about the timing of when we flex real time, and typically in the flexibility market, so to speak, as Robin mentioned, it's a fairly sort of, you have to participate within 10 minutes or you are out of the market kind of thing. It's also about space, and a lot of how we measure flexibility in terms of space is something we're trying to do. So we do quite a lot of conceptual and applied work in and out. I think what is distinctive in terms of data, we use a mix of smart meter data, so I mentioned, for instance, gas and energy demand data around before and after lockdowns and so on, but also mix it with non-energy data, like time use data. So what people are doing over their day, and in across different seasons, across different days of the week. So we do modeling which looks at, in a sense, both. What we're trying to understand is how much flexibility can happen, who is going to provide flexibility. So there's a bit of that sort of modeling and, towards perhaps a more automated and system where, flexibility will happen without too much human intervention. But at the same time, also understanding the implications of flexibility. So what I try to represent there, and was quite poor drawing, is a single mother nurse who is, has a very limited time when coming back from the hospital to run errands in the home, and needs probably even a lower income. And the last thing you want is to charge her 2 or 3 times for her electricity bills at that specific time of the day. And of course, with some of the tariffs that come with flexibility, like time of use tariffs or critical peak pricing, there's a bit of that risk that those who are on lower income but also time poor would be more disadvantaged and not be able to yield the whole benefits of flexibility. I was invited to speak on a report that we produced in collaboration with Res Publica. This is perhaps the most policy or even politics oriented type of side of the spectrum of the research we do. I'm happy. I think it's it's more complementary to what Brenda and Robin said today. So it's actually a good fit. But just as a warning, it's not the typical research we do, in a sense. I mentioned it now, but I'm saying a bit politics. I think it really started off with the idea of let's try and convince the most conservative in Parliament about the advantages of smart solar in particular, and combined with storage, of course. And so that in that spirit that the report was written. So it contains some high-level recommendations for government to move forward. So some of the starting points are valid to the scene setting that particularly Robin just provided. So renewables are really here. They currently are about 1/3 of overall national electricity supply. They're expected to do much more in the forthcoming decades, so an even larger share. And so they're really delivering low carbon energy. We have one of the most decarbonized grids around the world right now, something to be proud of, but there are also challenges. And the balancing with renewables is critical. Balancing costs are really hard to keep down. So who was earlier, like this morning, was on the radio saying, yeah, 2021 and 2022 are really hard for energy costs, but by 2030, renewables will do some of the job in terms of, not being so gas dependent and keeping the cost down. The truth is the volatility will be really high. So anyone who does a kind of price modeling in this area would tell you, we might get better prices than we're experiencing in this couple of years, but there was going to be quite a lot of volatility, and that's also quite seasonal. More is needed to decarbonize heat and transport, and that's in order to reach higher levels of decarbonization across the country. It is a context of increasing energy prices. I think when I wrote the report, I wouldn't imagine that it would become so topical. So there's kind of a trend over the last decade or so of increasing prices. There is a issue which is for instance, in England, 10% of households living in fuel poverty. And of course, we experienced a massive increase in wholesale gas and electricity prices recently. So the key message from the report would say is that ensuring that renewables are an increasingly cost-effective solution that will make future electricity accessible to everyone. So it's not a supply issue. It's really about demand, and as we heard, it's about flexibility. Okay, so the government has a smart systems energy plan. They revamped this in July. We also have an ongoing smart metering rollout, for which most analysts have less and less, let's say, hope that it's going to do much for flexibility. So in our report, we suggest that investments in demand-side response as well as electricity storage will reduce the costs of balancing demand and supply. But we need to make sure that the kind of technology and dynamic pricing which the government is currently trying to introduce are also matched by sort of the implications of flexibility. So trying to understand the winners and losers of the whole flexibility proposition is really critical. So at the moment, for an investment nowadays over the forthcoming 5 years of about £265 million, we expect benefits by 2050 of between 17 and 40 billion pounds. So that is kind of like the overall benefits of investing in this flexibility space. So what needs to change? So at the moment, the market does not sufficiently exclude high emitting power plants and gives too little value to low carbon flexibility. So there are barriers which Ofgem, for instance, is trying to address. I should say I'm on their academic panel, and they have a full flexibility program, which is about revolutionizing how markets work to ensure that flexibility finds the right value. We currently have a bit too much of emphasis on all megawatts being equal, regardless of location, capability, and carbon intensity. And that's something which needs to be addressed. What we suggest, as a recommendation report, is to have a single common policy on demand flexibility. There's quite a lot of sort of scattered around work on incentivize this, incentivize that, or let the market deliver on that. We really think that this would really help smaller energy users and lead to higher participation than we're currently experiencing. And then it's up to research to think of new types of flexibility that we didn't think about before. So years ago, we would have thought of electric vehicles only as a drain to the system, like increasing peaks. Yes, there is a lot of that narrative, but with vehicle to grid chargers, which are not a reality, it's a lot of work which needs to be done for it to happen. They now become a flexibility resource. The same could be said about many different parts of economy, which we're currently not thinking as flexibility providers. Cross-seasonal storage is not cost effective at the moment, and yet it will become extremely critical because the biggest swings in demand and supply and the biggest imbalances will experience across seasons as our heating system becomes more and more electrified and less reliant on gas. So a bit more on this common policy for DSR. And it's basically saying that we need really research also to understand the implications of a common policy. So to conclude, we need to think of flexibility of everything, including very innovative ways. Long storage duration, so it needs the market opportunities. We need to get to grips with the fact that flexibility may not be a win-win for everyone. So we need a common policy as a place to ensure that the benefits are spread across people and the system. And just to conclude, so I'll leave you with a few questions more than answers, but it's just from the research we do. So there's something about flexibility, who provides flexibility. So we do clustering of different users based on what they do at peak time and the type of dwelling they live in and the type of socio-demographics, to try and understand how much flexibility they might be providing. We do work on also clustering electric vehicle users. So you could disaggregate that at individual load level. What happens in the home, like how much time shifting can we do from laundries, how much electric vehicles or what the charging times are for different type of, for instance, commutes by car. And then switching fuels. So we have a bit of a case study on the Isle of Man. Flexing away from what? So there's an issue of what is there a core? Is there a minimum that we can think of? There are different demand side response baseline methodologies which can be used to define that minimum or what is normal. And seasonality matters. So we do work across seasons to understand how much seasons change and how much storage can actually address some of those interseasonal changes. And then flexing where, so there's something about how much flexibility should come from residential users, how much should come from workplace, and of course different geographies at local level, for instance. I'll leave you with a few links. One is to my book on peak energy demand side response, a lecture that I gave on this, which is available on YouTube, and another link to the research we do at the University of Reading on these issues. So another couple of projects we have on demand flexibility. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thanks very much for your talk there. It came in a perfect time as well. I'm going to have a bit of time here. I'm going to jump straight into a question that you received in your talk, Jacopo. What is your view on transmission charges, i.e. charging for distance from demand centres? I believe the UK has the highest transmission charges in Europe. this obviously has an effect on and large impact on feasibility of connecting renewable generation. The majority of wind is in the North Sea, far from the majority of demand in southeast of England, and that was from Rory Chalmers.
Okay, I'll try to give a straight answer. I think, yeah, there is an issue with transmission charges at the moment, the way they are designed. I think higher locational and temporal granularity are absolutely needed, especially given the generation fleet that we're experiencing and the changes in demand we're going to see in the forthcoming future. So in a sense, it's all about the granularity of those charges and how they're going to change, and based on location and time.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yeah, I think there are ongoing consultations with BEIS and the UK government at the moment for the kind of targeted charging review. And I do know if anybody wants to find out a little bit more or interested, Scottish Renewables are currently working on responses to that, as well as Solar Energy Scotland, both of the view that unfortunately Scotland is very heavily impacted on the targeted charging review, so it will have quite a negative impact on any financials of any renewables that are going to be deployed in the north of Scotland, such that they'll have much larger transmission charges than the rest of the UK. So it's certainly a hot topic. I'm going to jump back to one question for Brenda before I go to a question for all three of you together. So Brenda, you said in the Perth and Ross project, you're using the Tricon API to communicate with EDF, if I caught that correctly. And in Nova Scotia, it was a Tricon platform that was doing the hard work, I suppose, doing the hard graft. Firstly, is that correct? And secondly, which of those configurations do you see being the likely future for Storterra or for the market?
Sorry, my 3-year-old was just evicted from the room there while you're talking.
Question goes to,
Yeah. So the question, sorry, I didn't see it in the chat there. Was it in the chat?
No.
No, okay.
Off the cuff, sorry.
That's all right. So the question, the Tricon was the brains of the operation for both projects, and not configured particularly differently. So I can't say which one is better configuration. if I heard your question correctly. Okay,
so was the EDF cloud component, was that an additional layer for Perth?
Sorry.
So it's tech to be, is it?
Yes, that was, sorry, yes. In the Canadian one, there's no, the UK market's very mature with the grid services that we have here. We have a great range of income streams available for grid services. Over where we were in Canada, because it's a little microgrid, they didn't have anything. They don't have any grid services at the moment, so there's no aggregation going on over there. So so ideally they would do, because it improves the business case massively, as we've heard in all talks today. So yeah, hopefully other countries are going to have to catch up, and the UK is really leading the way in that sense, with the whole range of grid services. So so here in the UK, we've got the ideal, I would say, where you've got your revenue streams. Does that answer? Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I've got an excellent question from Neil Barnes. Hello tonight, Neil. Neil from Warmworks and Linlithgow Community Development Trust. So this goes to all three of you. Whilst the recent hikes in energy prices and reduction in competition could be a disaster for low-income households, will there be a boom for the battery storage industry, and how can we pass on any savings accrued to the poorest in society as a priority? Now that goes to anybody who'd like to come in on that question.
I can, I guess firstly I'd say, yeah, this is great. Volatility is great for energy storage. High imbalance prices are good for energy storage. So this is a really good time. I actually don't know that I have a solution to the problem that you've posed around how we can use we can benefit lower income houses via some and pass on some of that value. Energy storage, and actually a lot of the technologies that Delta researches are typically expensive and benefit wealthy people. And interestingly, that's one of the reasons why the UK government Ofgem removed the ability for companies to reduce their network charges using energy storage, is because they felt that forces the costs of maintaining the distribution or the transmission networks. It forces those costs onto people who can't afford energy storage. So I think it's a really good point. I sadly don't have a solution. Actually, I think the stuff that Warmworks was doing with the Tesla batteries has been really interesting, and I would encourage more organizations to explore this space.
I've got two different things to say. One up in Hoy in the Orkneys is a really nice example of sharing the benefits with the community. So they invested in a community wind turbine a few years ago, and the income that's generated from that wind turbine has now funded the installation of solar panels and store towers in 10 homes to start with. And up there in Orkney, it means they can generate their own energy, and with the Tricon, they use it all in their house because you can't export up there. The grid is rammed. So they get real savings. And if you connect a hot water tank to the Tricon, you get hot water included, and you can get heating included if it's electrified. So these homes are getting huge benefits from, wind turbine income. So that's a really nice example of it being shared, but of course you can't do that everywhere. The other just thought I had was, with things like what I described with the shared benefits, there's the opportunity for more of the investment to come from the utility, for example. So the lower income households get the hardware for free and they get lower bills, while the utility gets the benefit of reducing their peak, etc. So with the shared benefit, there's the opportunity there for the lower income to not have to pay anything up front.
Yeah, absolutely. Brenda, interesting project on Ahoy. I've heard a little bit about it. I would certainly echo what you and Robin said there in terms of the ability to, one way is to kind of have some more of these innovative rollouts that may benefit communities. Certainly, we've been involved in a number of projects across the country, Fife Council, Grampian Housing Association. There's some really interesting work going up in Orkney with the Reflex Orkney project. Quite a large number of these projects run by local authorities are driven by legislation such as the EISH standard, which is the energy efficiency standards for social housing that kind of force local authorities to look to do something. But they're also driven by innovation funding from the Scottish Government, and that's really what drives these local authorities to look at innovative solutions rather than the same old tried and tested. And I'd certainly say, given the recent hike in wholesale energy prices, that should be a stark reminder that, this innovation funding, if a project doesn't immediately see some financial benefit, it does help us accelerate towards the right solution. We've certainly been involved in projects with battery rollouts with no solar on and just heat pumps in the buildings. Now, the initial economics of that aren't going to stack up, but the information that we can gather and the data we can get for proposed solutions moving forward is quite priceless, and that's, I suppose, why you're saying we've got much more. We're much more mature than potentially some of the other nations, Brenda. So I'd probably say that's one way we can hope to benefit those who need it the most. That this innovation funding can be a win-win that can help deploy these units where they might be needed most, but also give us the information we need to tackle those problems. I'm going to jump on to a question by Glow. Let me just find it. Glow, you asked, individual storage methods, i.e. EVs and store towers, Tesla batteries, for example, completely remove the grid capacity system. Glow, if you were there, was that directed to anyone in particular, or is that to everyone? She's gone for a cup of tea, possibly. Would anybody...
Anyone. I mean grid capacity issue, sorry, like the
Okay.
fluctuation, yeah.
Would anyone like to jump in there?
I can start, but Brenda, I can see is probably have a lot to add. I guess I'd say, I mean, in theory, yes, you can. If you installed loads of batteries, then you would solve your grid capacity issues. The question is at what cost. So that when it comes to energy storage, cost is critical. It's often these technologies are expensive, the costs are falling, but the cost benefit analysis is really important to deciding what's economic and what just isn't going to work.
Yeah, the big challenge with, well, eliminating the grid, for example, is the base load. The big base load has to be met, and renewables are intermittent, so that's your challenge. You need a significant amount of batteries to fully clean the grid. There's many angles to this, but yeah, you need a lot of batteries. This is why the flow battery is really exciting. It's going to be really low cost. It's going to be big scale, so it could be, you know, dotted around the country, large flow batteries. You get short and long duration. It can support the grid, yeah, perfectly. Sorry, there's crying in the background. I would hope so. I'm going to just mute now because they're crying.
Thanks. Sorry, Jacopo, what were you going to add there?
Yeah, no, just a bit kind of taking it from Brenda. I mean, I guess the biggest question mark is around large scale and long duration batteries, and you know, how much. So you could imagine a future in which batteries do quite a lot of the intraday sort of balancing. It's a bit harder to imagine absorbing the peaks that we may see by the end of this decade, with plenty of electric vehicles and heat pumps into the system. But I mean, yeah, if you believe the story of you know, how the learning curves are already operating in the global markets, you know, the costs are really coming down, and so I want to be optimistic as well.
Fantastic, great. And following on from that, obviously we're going through quite a sustained period of global materials crisis and global pricing and shipping crises. That's leading to the cost of certainly battery storage, amongst other things, to rise. Does anybody in the group here have any views on how, you know, projections moving forward over the next 10 to 15 years, how that's likely to develop at all? Is this a momentary blip in the path of storage pricing?
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
I don't either. My feeling is that it's probably a relative blip. One interesting thing that occurred to me though was so there's a lot of talk about how electric vehicles are taking up all of the lithium-ion capacity, the production capacity, and that production capacity is increasing, which will bring costs down, and I think it will exceed hopefully the demand for electric vehicles. But I was just thinking maybe as that dynamic plays out, if all of the lithium-ion cells are going to EVs, then actually there's a chance for other technologies, other electric chemistries to compete, and that actually some of those will be longer duration perhaps, so like the flow batteries. So actually it could be really interesting for, we're not talking seasonal yet, but for, you know, longer term, longer duration storage.
Great, thanks, Robin. A question from David Leslie here. Is hydrogen electrolysis ever going to be a major aspect of demand flexibility, e.g. in remote places like Shetland? And that question wasn't directed to anybody. Not sure if anybody is operating in the area of hydrogen electrolysis and whether you'd like to comment.
At a push, I'll say I'm not an expert or a fan, to be honest. It's fine if it comes from renewables that are kind of going to waste anyway, then hydrogen makes sense. Transporting hydrogen around isn't great. I believe in Shetland they have, well, they have a Viking wind farm coming, don't they? A huge wind farm. Yeah, because I'm a battery person, I just say a battery is a better option instead of hydrogen. So sorry, I'm extremely biased.
We do research into hydrogen, but my focus is also batteries, so I'm perhaps biased as well. I guess my feeling when you suggest things like Shetland is actually that those are probably the places that we would see hydrogen, where you can power it from renewables, where you can create sort of localized centers of hydrogen production and consumption, so it's not being distributed widely. Those are really likely to be the places where it starts first.
Yeah, I would add that there's something about the infrastructure which you can use, and the infrastructure which you need to build. So the layers that of the costs associated with a highly hydrogen future, which makes many a bit skeptical. I mean, basically, like there are more costs than we are currently thinking of. But it's just we all think alike, so two alike. So, but yeah, I'm also not entirely sure that hydrogen will do for the future.
Yep, I think I'm going to second or third or fourth that response. Certainly, hydrogen in vehicle storage for vehicles certainly terrifies me. I wouldn't like some weekend drivers to be out with some pressurized hydrogen in their vehicles, but perhaps maybe for long haul, larger vehicles. Certainly what I've seen so far, the kind of levelized cost of energy for hydrogen isn't really too competitive, but at the moment, certainly there does seem to be a need for an energy mix that we don't quite have right in the country yet. So whether that's able to play a part in the future, is I suppose yet to be determined. I'm just reading through the chat. No more questions, but just Glow's further comments. Can't reuse existing gas system, a lot more flammable, and efficiency is not very competitive. So I think Glow, you fifth our views there. No more questions coming through in the chat. I just have one follow-up question, which would be about the recent volatility. I've heard, I've read articles which will state that the recent price volatility and the security of supply issues that we've had are all down to the increase in intermittent energy sources and the increase in renewables and the phasing out of coal. And we need to be careful of this renewable energy transition. And likewise, I see Robin shaking his head. And likewise, I've read other articles which would say it's because as Jacopo said, because we don't quite have that flexibility right yet. We don't quite have the demand side response yet. Is there a greater need for a wider, broader mixture of what's on our network? I mean, right now we have a huge amount of wind, very, very little solar and storage relative. There are a number of European countries that have a better ratio of solar to storage to wind, so to speak. Does anybody want to comment there?
I'll probably, I'll start this time. I think, yeah, I think, I mean, I don't buy the, because we had less wind in September story. I mean, it's a very marginal part of the story. This is really a gas supply issue. And we are one of the highest gas consumers in Europe as a percentage. It's a Europe-wide problem. It's true that balancing costs have been a real pain in the last 2 years. So we started with September, August 2020, and it continued that way. They're probably still going to be pushing price volatility up for quite some time. However, the best data we have in hand also shows a kind of 14% year-on-year improvement on overall operating costs, mainly because of avoided generation. So there's about the mix that you mentioned. I think that's something you know, to work on perhaps between solar and wind. But there's only one way forward, and so you have to work on the demand side to get higher flexibility. Yeah, so that's my view.
Okay, thanks, Jacopo. Robin, were you going to come in there, or?
Only that I don't think. I mean, I think yeah, renewables, low wind generation is a contributing factor. That means you have to turn on more gas generation, and obviously that's paying a lot for the fuel at the moment. But that I don't agree that that renewable penetration is the cause of the problem. It's supply and demand.
Fantastic. Great. Well, that takes us just about to 7 o'clock. So, Glo, if you're there, I'd like to hand over to you, but not before obviously thanking our three speakers.
I
And
think
thanking
it's fine
everyone.
if you feel you want to wrap up. That's fine by me. Yep.
I'll fire ahead and wrap up for us in that case. So thanks to all three of our speakers, Brenda, Robin and Jacopo. Thanks to all our guests here tonight. Thanks for the very interesting questions. It's been certainly very insightful for me, and I think so for everybody else. If you do know where the reactions button is at the bottom of your screen, then you can join me in sharing a virtual round of applause or celebration for our speakers. Thanks again for joining us. If you're on the mailing list, then I'm sure Glo will be sending out some updates on the Kerr McGregor Award, which will be coming up this year, and about the next webinar in our series. If you're not on the mailing list, I suggest that you get in touch with Glo and join. Without further ado, thanks very much to everyone, and wish you all good night.
Thanks,
Josh.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.